crazy. What's your biggest headline from that game?
Okay, so biggest headline, that Wednesday game, that Napoli, maybe the worst game in Conte's life, the worst game in Napoli's career, that looked like a blip. Because the response we saw, and maybe it's also because they were facing Inter and you have to get up for that game, but the response we saw was typical vintage Napoli from last season. It looked like the team had never missed a beat. So I think mentally from that standpoint, they look good, because we were ringing all sorts of alarm bells midweek, right? That Conte had lost the plot, that it's all these guys coming in, but they look like the Napoli of old. Inter, I thought, were actually okay in the first half. 2 headers hit the post, one hit the post, one hit the crossbar. Another one flashed wide off of Bastoni's shoulder. Lautaro had a one-on-one chance against Vanya. But as Mike Grella said, if Inter defend the way they do, right, and I think Napoli was genius in putting David Neres up front, because if you put Lorenzo Luca up top, you're playing right into Acerbi's hands. That's what Acerbi loves. He loves to feel the attacker. He wants to be pressed up against him.
Put Papi up top against Acerbi.
100%.
Put Papi to play striker against Acerbi.
What are you trying to say about Papi?
How would that go?
But he thrives against a guy who plays back to goal. That's what Acerbi wants. He doesn't want to be chasing and running and being pulled out of position. And what do we see? We saw goals coming because Inter's backline was out of position. We saw Acerbi way forward, right, with Çalhanoğlu, and that's where McTominay popped up. That's where McTominay got the goal. And then the Anguissa one, we saw one of the 3 center backs pushed high up the pitch. Anguissa took advantage, ran right through the heart of that Inter defense. So it actually worked brilliantly. We've criticized Conte and some of the changes he's made and the rotations that have not worked out. Today he had to because of some injuries, and he got it totally right by going false 9 and getting Inter's defense to go all over the place.
One thing that could have changed the game, though, we're going to bring Christina Unkel in right now to talk about it, is Billy Gilmour, because he could have had a red card, couldn't he?
Just a small one little thing that we just haven't mentioned yet, but okay.
Christina, I'll let you take us through it, because at one point when we first see this challenge, obviously we see Di Lorenzo get a yellow card. The world feed thought it was for Billy Gilmour, so they put it up on the graphic that it was a yellow card for him. And then he does get a yellow card later on in the game, so that should have been a red, but as we know, it was only a yellow for Di Lorenzo at the beginning. Was this the right decision in your opinion?
So for this play, no, it wasn't the right decision. This one, and I also want to clarify, right, even though you have what we call these types of bang-bang plays, you can still issue a yellow card for Gilmour and Di Lorenzo in this play. However, the first one, yes, we had 2 bang-bang plays. We had 2 different people go down. But if you isolate those clips in and of themselves, they each rise to the level of reckless play. And so therefore, the decision would have been preferred. Yes, you probably would have came out with 2 yellows on that. But at the same time, you're endangering the safety of the player, and they're deserved.
Obviously, we want to talk about some of Inter's missed chances, but the frustration from Inter was on full display here, which we saw by Lautaro really getting into it with Antonio Conte.
Do you guys remember that Lautaro and Conte, they were joking they should have a boxing match in training when Lautaro was an Inter player and Conte was the manager? Here Lautaro went to him and he said something, and then he started making these gestures, and they got worse from that point on.
There's obviously some blood and bad blood in there, but I think that these are also things. Lautaro's very competitive. Antonio Conte is very competitive. I don't even think it was them 2 that was fighting at first. I think Conte was fighting with another player. I think he was fighting with Dumfries, and then Lautaro got in the mix. So it was a game that had it all. You could tell the tension that was on display from the field, but also from the sidelines, and Conte projecting some of the pressure that he felt and how important this game was to give that to his players as well.
Opta have given, Inter a 50% chance to win the Scudetto. Has anybody's opinion of them winning the Scudetto changed because of this result?
My opinion has remained the same even from last year. There's a reason why I haven't put Inter to win. It's because they concede too many goals. We talked about Napoli conceding an average a goal a game. Inter, even before coming into this match, concede more. You do not win the Scudetto when you defend like this. Last year as well, we had a stat that no team had ever won the Scudetto when you don't beat Juventus and Milan. Inter didn't beat Juventus, Milan, or Napoli. You don't beat any of the big teams. No, you're not going to win the Scudetto. Now, can they go on? Absolutely. But that is the basis for why I don't agree with the stats and I don't agree with the numbers, is because when I watch them, they could look beautiful, but then in the tough moments, they don't give me the confidence to get it done.
Right, you've always gone for Napoli, but you 2 said Inter. Have either of you 2 changed your mind?
Yeah, I've changed my mind. Roma, Milan. I mean, look at the way Milan's played. Napoli, absolutely, who were probably, I think they were the preseason favorites, obviously, after they won the Scudetto. Just going back really quickly to what you said, I think Bastoni's a system center back. I think when you see him on the Italian national team, when you see him in a back 4, he is a guy who thrives in the system, and Kivu's not going to change his formation.
Grell, very quickly on the Scudetto favourite.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I still have Inter. I think it's one game, and they do produce a lot against the smaller teams. So I'm going to stick with Inter in this moment, but it's anyone's race at this point.
We have a good race
to say, oh, this team's going to win it. Any team could win it. Any team, they have big pros, and there's big negatives in all these teams.
Obviously, we'll talk about De Bruyne in a second, but Scott McTominay, we've got to talk about him, Tony, because he's been criticised a bit for not showing up in the big moments so far this season. Today was a real statement, wasn't it, from him?
Yeah, no doubt. And I think there's a bigger picture conversation with De Bruyne going off and him going centrally, and I know that gets into the weeds with tactics and all of that stuff, but just from a performance standpoint, no doubt about it, he was great today. Great finish on the goal. I think he probably was a little bit surprised at how much time he had. I mean, it's net, as you talked about this, Marco, making that little run, which opens up the space, and then maybe a few of the old legs of or tired legs of Inter players here trying to get back, and he buried it about as good as you can. And he's been everything for Antonio Conte. Today he stepped up.
He was the league's MVP last season for a reason. He pulled through in the tough moments whenever they needed a goal because they were struggling to score. I think you mentioned the stat before the game that they scored 20 less goals than Inter. It was always the midfielder. It was always Scott McTominay. And yeah, he's been slower. He's had to play out on the left. But this is what you expect from somebody that's a reference point to the team. And I know we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago when Antonio Conte has decided who he needs to play or who he needs to sub off. And I said, you never take off Scott McTominay because he's capable of this. He's one of the few within this squad that steps up and scores those decisive goals. Last year, out of all the goals they scored, I think it was 9 were the 1-0, were the important ones. So what a phenomenal player, and it's great to see him back at his best.
They lose 6-2 to PSV, and he knocks in 2 goals. He's always the constant that you can count on. And the other guy that's unsung hero in that midfield is Anguissa. This guy is an unbelievable player. He's winning balls. He's back and forth from box to box. He's inside the box. He's scoring fantastic goals all the time. Lobotka, not there today, but Lobotka and Anguissa, unsung heroes all the time. They're the ones who were part of 2 Scudetto winning teams, by the way.
Where does it leave Napoli now then? If, we don't know the extent of Kevin de Bruyne's injury, but you boys are sitting here saying, well, if he is out, you know what Napoli's going to look like more so with those 2 in the midfield, and everybody can kind of go back to their natural positions. Is that a positive that you could take from it?
Absolutely. And it sounds weird to say because we're talking about De Bruyne, who's one of the best players in the last 10 or 15 years of football. But Antonio Conte had to find a way to fit De Bruyne into this team. It was a question mark that we all had when you signed him. But I think Napoli as a club, rightfully so, said if you could sign a player like that, you get him. Now, he's in preseason. He was playing him central. They tried to put the 4 midfielders. Even in certain matches today, he moved away from his 4-3-3 because Conte is very adaptable. Now it's the Napoli of old. Now it's the Napoli of last season.
Do you prefer that?
Sounds weird to say prefer. I think in certain games, it gives you what we saw right now, right? And De Bruyne, as phenomenal as he is, he's always going to be an asset to the team. But they did change shape. And I think it's more about that would take more time to learn. And that's what they were trying to do. In preseason, all Conte said is we're going to press more. We're no longer the team that has to sit back all the time. You could look at Napoli's metrics. Napoli's metrics last season and this season have been different because De Bruyne is there. They've played man-to-man. They've played a little bit more aggressive. So I think now it does open that space. Not to say that they would not have learned to play with each other, but it just goes back to what they've known and what they had success with recently.